Today is June 8, 2018, and as usual, we'll start with asking our Heavenly Family to guide us. Heavenly Family, thank you for helping us through all of our recent meetings to come to better understand the issues involved related to who you are, what your character is, and how it is supposed to impact us. Please help us to remove all of our biases and to conduct an investigation that will actually show us the truth. Help us to gain an experimental knowledge of who you are and also what the past was. So please do help us in this meeting so that we can become the people we need to be in order to bring an end to the kingdom of error and darkness. Thank you. We ask this in the name of Branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so as you all know, we have been studying the character of the Father and of the whole Heavenly Family for, well, I guess a little over a month and a half now, almost 2 months actually. And we've looked at this subject through a few different channels. By far what we've spent the most time on is looking at the Exodus and really studying the historicity of the Exodus and looking at the Exodus stories as they appear in their various sources. And even more specifically, lately, we were looking through the Pentateuch at all 6 references that the sources of the Pentateuch make to Moses having written a document, and in at least 5 of those 6 instances, the words which are claimed to be in that document were quoted. So we wanted to check out each one and to ask some basic questions like, does this claim to have been written by Moses? Was it written by Moses? How about its morality? Does it promote good morals, bad morals? What is its relevance for the question of the historicity of the Exodus? And of course, we just got a basic overview of those texts and the potential answers to those questions. And then aside from the Exodus, we have looked at this topic through some other avenues, such as the historical Jesus. We talked about Jesus' relationship to John the Baptist and how Jesus' life really teaches us about the character of his Father and, of course, of the whole Heavenly Family. And all this started in the new moon of the first month with considering a text called the Gospel of Truth. So there's quite a lot of interconnected subjects here. And of course, in connection with the Exodus, we've talked a little bit about things like slavery and genocide and the conquest of Canaan under Joshua, and more thoroughly than any of those, animal sacrifice. So these are all different aspects that have a bearing on the character of our Heavenly Family. So with all of that, we are at a point in our meetings where we're kind of done with one aspect and potentially still have more to discuss before we come to our next new moon topic, whatever it may be. So in this meeting, and most likely into tomorrow night's meeting, I am hoping that if there are any questions that anyone has or comments on this overall topic, or if anyone would like to share anything that they've found in relationship to the things we've been discussing, then this is a great time to do that. So with that said, does anyone have any comments or questions on any of these subjects that we have been recently discussing?
Yeah, no, there's been voiced questions, right, about this whole blood, Jesus still bleeding in the sanctuary, but perhaps we could uh, relay back on Rachel's comments in the Facebook discussion. I think there still might be some hiccups there.
So did you have any more specific question or any aspect that you wanted to comment on or anything like that?
Well, not so much me, but just having discussions with other people. But I think there's just still some issues not being understood by some people, and it might be a great time to tackle them. I'm surprised no one's saying anything, but I guess I'm hoping that someone's gonna say something, because it seems to be the hiccup is where how could Jesus still be bleeding right in the sanctuary, and how come our heavenly family's just you know kind of chosen this route, symbolisms, etc., if they weren't really the originators of animal sacrifice, and just there's seems to be a lot there, unless everybody's figured it out by now.
No, I agree. I think I'm still, I still have a lot of misunderstandings, or just lack of understanding, basically, about, just the sanctuary. And, we were just watching something today about, you know, just kind of how Israel was actually quite similar to other, you know, cult. I'm not using the word cult in today's understanding of it, but just their their ceremony or whatever is more similar to paganism than most people think. And that the sanctuary might have come from some pagan ritual, and then I know that there's the whole idea of the council of wicked gods, and that maybe our God is the God most high, but there are a bunch of other gods that are real beings, and so I just think there's just a lot of confusion, even in fear, and really fear on my part too. I just have to be honest that the sanctuary has just been such a bedrock of Judaism and Christianity for so long. And I know that it's okay, even if there is no sanctuary. I know the truth. It's okay, whatever the truth is. But I just think the heavenly sanctuary and Jesus bleeding, and even the wicked council of gods, is something that I don't know. I'm even kind of afraid to just go outside of this message and hear what other scholars have to say on it, because I don't know why, but it just concerns me, scares me.
And do you mind if I ask, like, what about it scares you in some way?
I think what's starting to happen to my mind, and we've taught this in little pieces, so it's not like it should come as a big surprise, but that I know that's the whole point. Who is God? And I always thought of him as a being kind of above everyone else, but now we're learning that he's really not, and the truth is outside of him, and law is outside of him, time is outside of him, free will is outside of him, everything's outside of him. And so he might just be just another being, and then you start to wonder if there is even other beings, or if Earth is all there is, and if humans aren't all just making this up. um the only thing that makes me think that there is a God is prophecy, is like the Revelation 10 kind of thing, and even the writings of Ellen White, where I can see, her, popcorn trail to this message, to the things that we're learning now. are things that Venice don't really know, but it's actually there. You know, it actually is in her writings. And I understand the principles are what's most important. And even if there wasn't a God, you know, we should still live righteously. And so that really shouldn't change anything. But does that help you a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting how kind of I'm trying to kind of formulate this in the clearest way possible. So ultimately, like, it seems like what it gets down to, and I'm sure you're not alone in kind of the experience of, getting kind of freaked out about, like, oh, what if we have this whole other big thing to unlearn that we thought was right? And I noticed that you kind of went from this big thing about animal sacrifice, from that to kind of also then including the topic of the sanctuary, and then going from there to even just other life in the universe and everything, when really those are separate questions, of course, and I know that you know that, but it's interesting how it's like, whether it's animal sacrifice or some other topic, like when we for the first time, talked about the question of the historicity of the Virgin Birth. People went from that to like, oh, like, well, if the Virgin Birth is true, then what if this and what if that, and what if God doesn't even exist? And it kind of like goes to other things which really are separate questions. The same thing when we first talked about the possibility that maybe the Exodus isn't as we thought, or even the whole thing with the Pentateuch. So I just wanted to remind you how, we've been here before in terms of having some major thing that we are potentially at the point of unlearning. And whenever we come to a point like that, there's at least space or room for those sorts of thoughts to develop, like, going from this thing and kind of connecting it to whatever other subjects. And, I just wanted to kind of remind everyone, especially for anyone who's there, of like kind of dealing with the issue of what if animal sacrifice is just bad and our Heavenly Family never even gave any laws in relation to it at all, or whatever, and, dealing with the implications of that. It's just important to remember how we have been here with several other issues in the past. And yeah, sure, we have to change how we think about things, but it's always fine. It's always okay. It's always the sort of thing where we see the guidance of our Heavenly Family through the whole process, at least by the end of it, even if there's room for doubt in the middle. And then the other thing with my comment is that I just wanted to remind you guys about the need to assess each thing on its own merits, and to keep in mind the importance of evaluating each issue on its own merits. Now, I'm not saying that we look at everything in isolation from everything else and compartmentalize subjects. No, things do connect with each other, but we still have to consider each aspect upon its own merits, and then to deal with what does this impact and in what way. Because it can be very easy to kind of group a bunch of ideas in together that maybe shouldn't be grouped together so directly or in the way in which we might be used to grouping them in together. So those are all things to keep in mind. As far as ancient Israel's sacrificial system, yeah, I think a lot of it is quite similar to other nations' sacrificial systems. And while that might seem like a shock to us, that wasn't a shock to ancient Israel. So that's something to keep in mind too, that kind of where we come from when we learn a certain thing has an impact on how we view it. So it's kind of like our expectations often influence our response to something. The psychologists have tested this too. If you give someone an expectation of winning $100 and then they get there and you just give them 5, people are going to be disappointed. But if someone has no expectation of getting any money and you give them $5, it seems like some great blessing. So it's just really important to keep in mind how much our past assumptions and our upbringing and what we have come to believe at different points impacts what seems like a big deal to us and what seems like it's shaking our foundation and what doesn't seem like that. So while to us it might seem like, oh, if animal sacrifice is not actually ordained by God, or if it didn't originate with God, then we end up, having a really major experience of our foundations are shifting, and it could be stressful or whatever. But it's really interesting to realize how it's like, okay, that might be the case for us, but for other people, at different times, that wasn't the case at all. So, for example, the Nazarenes were Jews who believed that the Pentateuch wasn't written by Moses. They were the first group that we today have on record to reject the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch. And they also rejected animal sacrifice, but they believed that Moses was a prophet, and they believed in other prophets after him and different things like that. So to them, it wasn't at all an earth-shaking thing. It was just like they just believed that wasn't part of it, and that most other Jews got it wrong. And the same thing with whoever wrote some of the passages in the Clementine Recognitions. They clearly believed that sacrifice, Clementine Recognitions and Homilies actually, whoever wrote those passages clearly believed that animal sacrifice was a bad thing, and that God never wanted anyone to sacrifice animals. And to them, that didn't at all pose any sort of problem for believing in God or believing in Jesus or anything like that. Like, to them, it really wasn't a difference at all. In fact, they viewed Jesus having as at least part of his mission to bring an end to animal sacrifice and to correct that great misconception among the Israelites, which that misconception, according to the Clementine Recognitions, is something that they gained through contact with Egypt. That really they adopted animal sacrifice from other nations. So it's kind of interesting how others in the past did not find these same ideas that we're talking about to be earth-shaking or earth-shattering or anything like that. So it just goes to show how it is possible, both today and in the ancient world, to think of our heavenly family and to think of God and to think of Jesus. And even, by the way, the Clementine Recognitions and Homilies also have the idea of a heavenly sanctuary and an antitypical sanctuary system and all of those sorts of things. And yet they think that ancient Israel got their sacrificial system from pagan nations and that animal sacrifice was bad. And that didn't appear to be a conflict to them. To them, it was like basically the heavenly sanctuary and the true priestly system, which doesn't have death as part of it, is just the original, the best, the good, the righteous thing. And the other systems were just corruptions and misrepresentations. So it just goes to show that the issues really are ultimately separate, and you can have one without the other in whichever direction you take that. But yeah, obviously it's still a process in coming to understand whatever the truth is and to make the mental shift from how we are used to thinking about it to whatever the truth is. But that's okay. That's what we're supposed to be becoming accustomed to. And I think to a great degree, many of us here are becoming accustomed to that. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I call it coming to the fork on the road again, or something like that. And we should get accustomed to saying, okay, there's a fork on the road again, right? Kind of thing. That's how I describe these type of things when we come to a topic where it might be something that's requiring us to unlearn, traditional way of thinking and embedded type topics from the past, right? It's another fork on the road. So.
Sure.
Now, I just wanted to ask more about Jesus bleeding in the sanctuary. We were talking about that in the Facebook. Now, I don't have a hard time thinking about it in a symbolic way, right? However, for a materialistic way, can we talk about that more? Like, I think Rachel mentioned there's chronic bleeding. But yeah, like it's been, over 2,000 years. So how does that play out to understand that better, or to be able to explain it to someone else better?
Okay, sure. So, first, I'm not sure why someone would think about it in a symbolic way, other than just going with the traditional Christian view. But Hebrews definitely has it presented as a reality, and that's one of the points that was emphasized in the branch message through Ben Roden. Ellen White clearly taught it. Wagner clearly taught it. If you guys aren't familiar with the branch literature on the subject, I highly recommend it. Doug Mitchell has written on the subject as well. There's a study, I'm not remembering the exact title of it, but it's called The Passion of the Gospel. And it's a response to an article by Samuel Bakioki, in which Samuel Bakioki was responding to Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. So, yeah, The Passion of the Gospel is Doug's article, which really deals with this subject most fully out of Doug's writings. So, yeah, basically, it's not like it's some impossible thing for someone to bleed for long periods of time throughout their life. It's not at all an unusual thing, just so long as you aren't bleeding enough that your body can't keep up with, giving yourself enough blood, then you will be able to continue living. So basically, someone isn't going to die if they have a continued wound, just so long as they aren't bleeding so much that they have critical blood loss. So that's as simple as that is. The other thing that I'll add to that is that we don't know exactly how much or how often or how frequently Jesus has bled. So, we don't know exactly on what occasions he bleeds or anything like that. So we can't really say that he's been bleeding a lot over the past 2,000 years. There may have been long periods where he didn't bleed at all. It's hard to say for sure, just because this is something that we don't know a whole lot about. But this is one of those things where the priesthood of Jesus has life and death as part of it, or life and suffering. And, it's a negative thing. Ellen White, by the way, she in addition to just making clear, direct statements regarding Jesus bleeding, and she talks about warm, fresh blood and different things like that, she also talks about Jesus crying out, "My blood, Father, my blood, my blood, my blood." And it's clearly portrayed as a horrific experience. Obviously, horrific things happen. So something being horrific, something being bad is a totally separate issue from whether it's a reality or not. But this shows how this sort of situation cannot continue forever. Like, it would be awful for it to continue forever. So when I say it cannot continue, I just mean that it shouldn't continue. It's something that cannot continue forever if righteousness is to reign, ultimately. Lois Roden had studies in which she talked about how we need to have the priesthood of Melchizedek, not just the priesthood which is after the order of Melchizedek. And Jesus' priesthood is not the Melchizedek priesthood. It is the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, which means patterned after the Melchizedek priesthood. Patterned after it, but yet it's still not perfect. And Lois talks about the Melchizedek priesthood being one of everlasting righteousness and life and no tasting of death, and et cetera, et cetera. That's ultimately what we are going back to. And the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about the 7 heavenly sanctuaries, and they talk about bloodless offerings and, basically priesthood that is without the shedding of blood. And so that sort of thing is there in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. But I just wanted to mention that element of what Lois brought into the picture, since I think it kind of just shows how it's important not to simplistically view the priesthood of Christ, because it is a quote-unquote heavenly priesthood, as representing what the heavenly priesthood ultimately should be. So, yeah, hopefully that kind of helps to bring some enlightenment to the actual question that you asked, Anna, and going a little bit beyond.
Yeah, right. I'm glad you pointed me back to that study by Doug about Bakioki. I'm going to look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Before we move away from that, would it be, is it possible that Doug addressed how would a healthy person's wounds not heal in 2,000 years? How would, that if we're thinking of reality, in reality, he was raised with a glorified body, so he could have been anything else. So,
sorry, your voice just really dropped away.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Christ being resurrected with a glorified body. He should have been very healthy. Why wouldn't his wounds have healed within 2,000 years? And then the other thing, it was just a short comment that I'm really thankful that we have learned that God took and does not take any pleasure in animal suffering and animal sacrifice. That I think that bothers everybody as children, and then we just get desensitized to it because that's what grown-ups tell us. It's in the Bible, so we believe it. But and correct me if I don't understand everything about it, of course, but the way I'm understanding that is these people were sacrificing a lot. And God knew that they were going to continue doing that. And so am I correct that he just connected that with the fact that, tried to point them to the day when Christ would come and live his life of free of sin and be a spotless lamb, and try to turn it into something good in the end, but yet knowing that they were going to sacrifice anyway, like you've brought out before, cut way down on the amount of sacrificing that could be done by having all the people have to come to a certain place to do it, and this and that and the other thing. So, and I was totally unaware that they really got that from the heathen nations, but that makes sense, because that's what the heathens did. So I'm not having a big problem understanding that God didn't ordain those sacrifices. I'm relieved to know that. And we are in a stage of much unlearning. That's all I can say. Anna put it another way, another fork in the road. Well, another thing to unlearn, but with the blessing of new light on just who he really is, and how he used that basically to bring us back around to Christ and his ultimate sacrifice, and even just becoming a man. So that's all I wanted to say about that. I didn't say it as well as I would have liked to, but I am still confused why a healthy body would not have healed wounds in 2,000 years. And I didn't know if Doug brought it out in that study, or if we've talked about it and I just simply forgot it. So that's it.
Okay, so first, on the issue of the wounds, I don't remember Doug talking about that one way or the other, but it depends on exactly what we mean by a healthy body. I mean, you have a body that's otherwise healthy, but still has issues in terms of like if you have extra thin blood, or if you have I forget exactly what it is that allows wounds to heal. But there's a few different conditions that people can have where they can live a life that's generally healthy, but like if they get a wound, their wound basically doesn't heal, or it heals very, very slowly. To be clear, I'm not saying that Jesus has that condition or anything, but I'm just saying something like that may apply, or it might simply be that the wound has been re-inflicted or reopened or whatever time and time and time and time again. So it's not necessarily that there's no healing process going on, but
I thought of that too. I wondered about that. Yeah, that came to my mind. It's like the only way that could be in a perfect body that Christ would have would be if, while he's officiating for our sins, just like a diabetic, all you have to do is just prick your finger just a little bit and you get a drop of blood. So I agree, it doesn't have to be copious amounts of blood. But it's a strange thing to contemplate when you first study that. And I'm sure we'll have more answers as time goes on.
So, I guess that's it on that element. As far as the other aspect, dealing with animal sacrifice and kind of the origins of it in relation to ancient Israel and all of that, I'll just mention that, I'm not sure how many of you, or if any of you, have looked up the origins of animal sacrifice. I know it's something that I mentioned on the calls a couple times, but if you look it up, basically what you'll find is that as far back as history can go, and as widespread as humanity could be, animal sacrifice, including human sacrifice, was just like an inbred part of everyone's culture. Like, it's just there all over the place, long before Israel ever existed. And so it's definitely not like an Israelite thing. So, if that's just what humans were doing, and it's like seriously as much a part of culture and of regular experience as going to the grocery store is for us, then yeah, you can imagine that our heavenly family might have a real task at their hands in order to wean people away from that practice. Like, if we start thinking about things in terms of trying to put ourselves in our heavenly family's shoes and think what it must be like to have such a task, then I think we can understand how, yeah, things happen very often incrementally, like incremental improvements, and a lot slower than after the fact we might think would be best, and indeed it would be best. But I mean, what does our heavenly family have to work with, and what would we have to work with if we were in their place? And would we be able to move along a humanity as corrupt as they have had to deal with any faster than they have been able to? Those are all different elements to keep in mind.
Hey, Trent. Actually,
yeah.
I should let Lynn make any comments that she wanted to as a wrap up. Sorry, Lynn.
No, that's fine. I'm fine listening. I'm done anyway.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so here's the thing with bleeding in the heavenly sanctuary. This is again a question that many of us have, but I personally also have. Is it and Trent, I know I've asked you this so many times. I think I've asked you this, like 3 years ago. So, but it just seems like him bleeding. Like I just don't really understand what that really does. Like it seems like like almost like it's a ceremonial kind of thing. Because again, in a court of law or in justice, if somebody is bleeding for me, it doesn't really do anything. And with the animal sacrifices, like I think Rachel had mentioned this in her Facebook post, like when there was animal sacrifice, I think we just all kind of dogmatically, went along with that. And it is horrible. And I think all of us are really glad that there's no animal sacrifice. Like, I don't think that's an issue. I wouldn't think with any of us. I mean, that's just a horrible thing. And to find out that the Heavenly Family never sanctioned it, maybe it's done in concession. I get all that. And I think that makes us very happy. But the focus then, I think we thought Jesus was bleeding in the heavenly sanctuary again, kind of like, because blood is, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. And so like how, I understand that, what is that? As Hebrews says that, why is that? I guess why does, without the shedding of blood, is there no remission of sins?
Okay, so first, I want to separate a few things just to kind of straighten out our thoughts in relation to these subjects. Okay, so what we've brought up recently is the issue of animal sacrifice and how that relates to the character of our heavenly family. That's one subject. And okay, if it's true that everyone's glad about that, which I think it is, like people should be glad to find out, oh yeah, God doesn't want animals to die. I'm sure everyone gets that and is happy with that thought. But then somehow going from that to the issue of Jesus bleeding and kind of like maybe some of the assumptions around that, kind of like, oh, is Jesus' blood supposed to do anything? And, that sort of thing. Those two subjects are really quite separate from each other. And so, like, the only way in which they are related is through a type-antitype relationship. But type and antitype are just simply all that is a parallel drawn between two things due to similarities in order to derive lessons from them. That's really all it is. And I know we've mentioned this study so many times, but I'll mention it again. The study, The Truth of Sacrifice. And we have several other studies on YouTube as well going through these sorts of things. But in the past, we've talked about how animal sacrifice is really immoral. Killing animals is immoral. They're innocent and they shouldn't be killed. And then we've talked about how Jesus' death wasn't really a good thing. And we've talked about how there's no magic with Jesus' blood. His blood is just like any of our blood. And the fact that there's a parallel between the two, the shedding of the blood of an animal like a innocent sheep or goat or bovine or whatever, and the shedding of the blood of Jesus, isn't so surprising. It's like, wow, one is dying horribly, immorally, and so is the other. To make that type an antitype is just drawing that parallel. It's not endorsing one or the other. In order for something to be an antitype of something else, it doesn't require the first thing to be instituted by God or ordained by God or anything like that. I mean, you have ancient Babylon and modern Babylon. It doesn't mean that God appointed either ancient Babylon or modern Babylon. It's just simply that our Heavenly Family draws our attention to the similarities between them because it is enlightening in regard to the character of the present circumstances. Just so, Paul in Galatians 4, by the inspiration of our Heavenly Family, drew a parallel between Isaac's, the persecution that Isaac underwent by the hand of Ishmael, and the persecution that the believers in Jesus were going through in Paul's own day by the hand of the Jews who rejected Jesus. That parallel was really enlightening. Paul was able to draw their attention to the fact that Ishmael ultimately didn't prosper in that, and so too the persecutors of the people in Paul's day wouldn't prosper. That's an encouraging thing to draw their attention to. Also, he was able to draw their attention to the mothers of those respective children, and he used Sarah as a symbol for the Jerusalem above, the mother of us all, the Spirit by whom we are to be born, and all of those things. And he was able to draw lessons there as well, being born again, etc., etc. Does that mean that God ordained Ishmael to persecute Isaac? No, not at all. It's just that our Heavenly Family drew the parallel to show lessons. Just so, animals being killed, ritual slaughter, all of these things, it's a horrible thing. So our Heavenly Family uses that, draws a parallel between that and another horrible thing, the killing and suffering of their Son. And they do that in order to draw lessons regarding his innocence and the unnecessary nature, ultimately, of his death. And, there's a lot to learn through these parallels. So just learning that our Heavenly Family, like as a possibility, as it is in Jeremiah 7, one of the Exodus traditions among the ancient Israelites was that God didn't have anything to say about animal sacrifice at the time of the Exodus. Another tradition is that our Heavenly Family did have something to say, but it was really in order to minimize it as much as possible. And then other traditions have animal sacrifice presented in a very positive light. And those are the ones that we're used to with the Exodus, because that's what is in the Pentateuch. So really all we've done recently is to point out that the way it's presented in the Pentateuch in relationship to the Exodus is only one presentation of the subject among others that the ancient Israelites had. And we shouldn't just assume that the traditions contained in the Pentateuch regarding Yahweh's relationship to animal sacrifice are the correct ones. Maybe Jeremiah's one is the correct one. Maybe the one in the Clementine Recognitions is the correct one. Let's be open to considering whatever it may be. And ultimately, one of those traditions contained outside the Pentateuch, whether it's the Jeremiah one or whether it's the one in the Clementine Recognitions or whatever, it is in more harmony in principle with what we've already learned in the truth of sacrifice anyway. That being that animal sacrifice is ultimately immoral. The other aspect in relation to this that we didn't really talk about in the truth of sacrifice study is the origin of animal sacrifice and the possibility that the first animals killed were killed not according to some instruction or system that our Heavenly Family gave, but because people killed them. But that isn't really too much different from what we could imply from the truth of sacrifice study. So I'm mentioning all this to point out that really what we've brought up recently in regard to animal sacrifice doesn't actually go too far beyond what we've already discussed in the past. It just takes one extra step further and is open to considering different possibilities for the origin of animal sacrifice. But again, it's not that revolutionary in connection with what we've already learned. But all of that really has nothing to do with the antitypical system, because the antitypical system stands or falls no matter what. It's kind of like whether Heavenly Family really endorsed the typical system or whether they just used a system that was already in place in order to teach lessons doesn't really change what the antitype is. It just changes how we view their character as to whether they would implement such a system in type to begin with, one way or the other. But again, since we have already learned, totally separately from this issue of animal sacrifice, we've already learned that Jesus' death wasn't a good thing, that he didn't have to die, that his blood isn't magical. Then really to learn that animal sacrifice was bad and all that anyway, all that means is that the type and antitype are more parallel to each other than we realized. Like, the weird thing would be if our Heavenly Family was so pro-animal sacrifice when we've already learned that they didn't want their son to die and that Jesus didn't actually have to die and that it was a bad thing that people killed him. So that would be weird if it's like we want animals to die, or we are instituting as a new thing for you guys to start killing animals. It's kind of weird that they would do that just to show that Jesus may die when they don't want him to die. It makes a lot more sense that, hey, animals were being killed. Maybe our Heavenly Family used that as a type as to what may happen to their own son, or after the fact to say, look, just like you've done this to animals, now you've done it to our own son. The parallel is all the more strong. So when you take that now to Jesus' blood and what it may or may not do, again, I'll say that is really so separate from what we've discussed recently in regard to animal sacrifice. No matter what the case is, whether our Heavenly Family endorses animal sacrifice or they hate animal sacrifice or they instituted it as a brand new thing or they just gave laws to restrict it because people were already doing it, whatever the case may be in relation to that, that doesn't change whether Jesus' blood accomplishes something or not. And just to refresh people's memory, but again, the truth of sacrifice, I recommend for people to go there. What we've learned about Jesus and his death and the shedding of his blood is that Jesus' blood does not of itself accomplish anything. It is purely human blood. It doesn't have any magical properties. Him doing it can be as meaningless to an individual as they take it to be. It can be utterly meaningless. So it, in and of itself, does not accomplish anything. The blood itself is meaningless other than the meaning that one may attribute to it. But the meaning that one may attribute to it is hugely impactful because, well, I'll put it like this. To me, Jesus' blood means a whole lot. Not because it has any sort of properties that make it special, and not because it is used in some ritual or anything like that. To me, it means a lot simply because Jesus was willing to die, going back beyond, let's go pre-quote-unquote Jesus, because Jesus really is the incarnate Son of God. The Son of God, before the incarnation, was willing to go to the point even of death, was willing to take that risk to come here to become our representative, to take back humanity in the government of heaven, and to represent us before the universe. So no longer would Satan represent us, but now he would represent us. He was willing to go through that knowing that he might die in order to become our representative in the politics of heaven once again. And that's huge to me, that our Heavenly Family cares enough about us that they're willing to actually die for us. Again, this isn't, let's kind of try to remove all the theology from it because it muddies the waters. It would mean a lot to me if any one of you were willing to die for me. And I bet that any one of you, if someone here died for you, like to save you, not like a ritual or whatever, but let's say something happened and they were really trying to help you. You were in danger. Maybe you didn't even know that you were in danger. But afterward, you found out that you were in danger and that they risked their life for you and they ended up getting killed as a result. Yeah, that would mean a lot to you. So that's why the blood of Jesus means a lot to me. As far as Jesus bleeding in the heavenly sanctuary, that's something that is just as unnecessary and just as awful as Jesus being killed to begin with. And does it mean something to me? Yeah, it does mean something to me, because it means something to me that Jesus is willing to put up with a ludicrous political situation where even after doing everything for humanity and humanity still having hard hearts and still walking in the ways of error and still following wicked gods and remaining in the dominion of these other gods, even after he bought the world back, people are pledging allegiance to the flag of lies. And in spite of all that, Jesus is willing to continue to interact with this system of wicked gods and their followers, which includes all of us, whether in the past or still in the present. He's willing to go through that, even though most people just don't care at all. And him shedding his blood, again, it's to satisfy the demands of unreasonable beings. And he's demonstrating, like, basically I'll put it like this. In view of his blood, the gods of the nations have no argument. So, do they need to see Jesus' blood again and again from time to time? Yeah, you bet they do, because 2,000 years is a long time, and even just a few weeks or a few months or a few years passing, people forget things so easily, and people misportray things so easily. Like, you guys all know how, like, look at the history of Adventism, or look at the history of just the branch. The branch hasn't been around that long in the scope of the history of the world or the history of the universe. It's been around for just a short little time, and look how much gets misrepresented in just a short time. Look how lies can gain a foothold in just such a short time. So, is it the case that Jesus really needs to show yet again, even though everyone knows he died and all of that, and that should be enough? But does he need to show again, hey, I'm still one of them. They are all my brothers and sisters. I have the same blood flowing through my veins as they do through theirs. Yes, I am still partaking of their suffering with them and all that. Is it really necessary? Under the circumstances, yeah, because people twist things in very short order. So he does make statement after statement. And in a sense, Mary, like you mentioned that it seems kind of ceremonial. Again, it depends what we mean by ceremonial. You know, everything that we do that's part of language, that's part of communication between each other, like, really, it's all symbolic. We are finding ways to represent ideas. Does that mean it's meaningless? No, that means it's meaningful. When you have an action that is done to represent something, that is really where something has meaning. Actions that are not done to represent something bigger don't actually have a lot of meaning to them. They're just an action that there's just simple cause and effect. The most meaningful thing is the thing that's done for the sake of representing something bigger than it. And Jesus shedding his blood is just that. It represents his whole attitude to humanity. And for those in the universe who do have reason to them, it really shows time and time and time again the unreason of the wicked gods. And ultimately, when all is said and done, everyone will see how horrible it was and how unnecessary, in an ultimate sense, Jesus' suffering was and Jesus' death was and all of that. But we'll all see how important it was and how loving it was and how necessary it was under the screwed up circumstances for Jesus to do what he did and to continue to do what he is now doing. And so, yeah, you know, I know that this is a really mind-boggling subject in a way, and there's a lot of meaning to it. There's a lot of depth to it. And I can understand, especially in light of our misconceptions that we've all grown up with concerning what Jesus' sacrifice means and all of that. I totally understand how easy it is for our minds to revert to thinking of Jesus' blood and of Jesus' death in the usual ways and in the wrong ways. But that proves the point. It shows really how we all are so quick when we are used to thinking of things in the wrong way. We can so easily continue to think of things in the wrong way or to forget what the right way is. And so it shows the constant need of reminders, right? And that's what Jesus is doing. You know, that's his whole work.
That's why we do what we do at the dailies.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing. Unleavened bread, oil, grape juice. Do these things mean anything? Do these things accomplish anything? No.
Other than
exactly
what we allow them to in our experience by taking in what they represent as a lesson to learn from.
Totally. And you know what? There are people out there who, like, I'm sure there are many meals eaten that include unleavened bread with oil on it and grape juice as part of the meal. And people are just eating it, not even thinking about Jesus or about his sacrifice or about lessons or anything like that. And guess what? It doesn't make them any better. It doesn't do anything for them, because those things are totally powerless in terms of sin and righteousness and all of that. Has nothing to do with those items. It only has to do with the lessons, and they are only a reminder. And it's the same thing with Jesus' blood. Jesus' blood has no inherent power, but there's a lot of lessons to learn from Jesus' death and his suffering. And we should learn those lessons, and that's what's really meaningful. So anyway, I really hope that was helpful, Mary. And seriously, like I said, I totally understand. Like, I know you said that you've asked the question before and whatever. That's fine. You know, it's the way things are. That's how we operate. So anyway, yeah, does that help in any way, Mary?
Yeah, thank you. It does actually. So now here's, and I know you were talking to me earlier this week, and I think you just cleared up one thing I was thinking wrongly, is that when we say Jesus is bleeding in the heavenly sanctuary, what I'm picturing is in heaven, he's doing something for the heavenly family. Like there's some reason he's doing it to, maybe wipe away sin or wipe away the record of sin when someone is truly repented, that there's something like that going on in the sanctuary. But really what you're saying is that it's all, his blood is all at the hands of the council of the wicked gods. And it's all a result of the politics of the wicked gods. And has nothing to do with the heavenly family, nothing to do with our salvation in that judgment respect. It has everything to do with, I guess, his keeping his foot in the door to preserve. I mean, it's kind of like, it sounds like he's trying to do everything just to keep some right of, I guess, maybe even just a right to communicate with us through what he accomplished by living a righteous life. So his blood is totally at the hands of the reason of the wicked gods. It has nothing to do with the heavenly family, nothing to do with the quote unquote heavenly sanctuary. And I'm sure I'm picturing an earthly sanctuary in heaven, since the one on earth was made after the pattern of the one in heaven. And I understand that you said that that the sanctuary is made up of humans, of people that can, that aren't, static in one certain building or anything like that. But, Ellen White kind of talks about the curtain being pulled back and Jesus moving into the Holy of Holies as though it is a physical place. I guess I was looking at the blood of Jesus being shed in the heavenly sanctuary, and I realized I thought that because I thought there was animal sacrifice on the earthly sanctuary, and there could have been an earthly sanctuary without any animal sacrifice. I know that now. But so his blood is just being shed as some type of unreasonable qualification in the sanctuary or in the council of the wicked gods. Am I getting that right?
I think you are understanding it correctly. I'm going to kind of rephrase a couple things for the sake of others in case there is some misunderstanding. But I do think that you are understanding it correctly, Mary. So as it relates to salvation, Jesus' blood only has an impact in terms of the lessons we can learn. That's it. It's not like he's doing anything with it that affects salvation in any direct way. And you are right, it's not like he's shedding blood to kind of like fulfill some requirement on the part of our heavenly family for the sake of salvation of humans. No, it's just the unreasonable politics of the wicked gods who are ruling this world. And in order for Jesus to have an impact on this world, he has to interact with them. He has to interact with us. So he has to deal with screwed up stuff. That's the way it is. So when it comes to the sanctuary, though, just to be clear, yes, So Ellen White, she mentions about the curtain between the two apartments and all of that. But if you read Ellen White's descriptions, she talks about the bells, she talks about different things, and it's clear that she is using the language of the type to talk about realities beyond the language that she's using. For example, Jesus probably isn't wearing a replica of the clothes that an Israelite high priest wore. We really have no clue what Jesus is actually wearing wherever he is out there in the universe right now. We don't know what he's wearing because the garments in the priestly system ultimately, as it relates to the antitype, represent other things. They don't represent garments that look just like them. So we don't know what Jesus is wearing. We don't know what the building he may be in at a given time might look like. The heavenly sanctuary, and again, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are multiple heavenly sanctuaries, and that fits very well with what Lois wrote and taught concerning different heavenly priesthoods. But the heavenly sanctuary is the divine council, or heavenly sanctuaries are divine councils. That's actually what they are. So when Jesus is, quote unquote, bleeding in the sanctuary, what that's saying is that he is showing his blood to other beings.
That's part of what all the ornamentation and the drawings that were to be depicted in the temple were representing, right? It's actually representing the heavenly council. It's not a church building.
Right.
It's not where you go to worship.
Exactly. So it's, Jesus bleeding in the heavenly sanctuary is Jesus bleeding, showing his blood before the council. That's really what it is. So it's not like he isn't bleeding in the sanctuary. It's just that we might have a wrong idea in our mind as to what that means. It is actually the council idea. That's ultimately what it is. That's hopefully that clarifies just a few of those points. But yeah, I do think you're understanding it rightly, Mary, and I hope that everyone else is grasping the subject.
That clears up a lot. That clears up the rest of what I was wondering. And I do just want to say that Jesus, in that regard, in the political realm, suffering from us has actually had quite an impact on me, because it just makes more sense. It is, and maybe that's it just hadn't made sense to me the whole time until now, but that is really horrible, and I can see the importance every time, whatever thought or whatever has come into my mind. I have really stopped and just thought, like, no, I can't do that, and so that it is a really powerful thing, and that has cleared that up a lot. Thank you.
I just want to mention how, this whole thing, the ideas really aren't that hard to understand. And we all, once we have it explained and all that, we all can get it. And it just makes way more sense than the other ways that we've thought about it. But isn't it just so, what I'm wanting to do at this moment is just take a couple minutes to broaden this beyond the subject of sacrifice, beyond Jesus' blood and all of these things, to just take a moment to reflect upon how theology really messes us up, doesn't it? When it comes to these things, yeah, exactly. When it comes to these things that we have to unlearn, when we relate it to something that we're more used to, this is actually a political thing. Oh, this is actually just, whatever realistic thing that it is, then everything comes together. But it's all of these thoughts that are really in the realm of theology and religion that tend to get us confused. So when we think words like spirit, words like creation, words like God. It's like these things all become, like we attach meanings to these words and these ideas that are so rooted in immaterialism. And seriously, I think of how much easier this would be for all of us if we didn't think about it in terms of theology and religion and immaterialism and all of that. And it makes me despise immaterialism and quote-unquote religion and theology and all that, because all it contributes is confusion. It doesn't contribute anything positive. Like I've mentioned before several times on the calls, words that I would avoid in making a translation of quote-unquote the Bible, like prayer. That word conveys an idea that is not helpful at all. Like, think about this. The way people think of prayer is really at the root of how some people think, oh, God, he's just an imaginary friend for adults. Well, why is that? Because people are talking to him in their head all the time, as though he's right there, when of course he isn't. You know, God's a real physical being in a real location. And then we kind of use this idea of this imaginary being, and it just adds confusion. So even the word God is not a helpful word when it comes to our heavenly family. It's not a helpful word at all in light of how people think of the word God. The word create or creation is not helpful if we want to understand ancient Israelite writing. And it's not helpful if we want. It only brings confusion because we're thinking in terms of magic. Same thing with words like prayer, words like spirit, soul. And it's not just words. Even in instances where we have words that are perfectly fine, words like blood. I mean, that's fine, but when we say Jesus' blood, all of a sudden it's like theologically loaded, and there's all this stuff attached to it that goes so far beyond the simplicity of the words and the simple historical reality of Jesus and all of that. And it's like, I want to encourage everyone here to try and distance yourself mentally from theology, religion, anything mystical or so-called spiritual or whatever. Just try thinking of things in terms of atoms and particles and material reality. You know, that's the thing. So anyway, as we continue on in our studies, we will be doing this more and more so, and it is a process to change our thinking, and, you know, we're all going through it, myself included, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm really glad to be getting rid of some of these paradigms that, again, are nothing but harmful. So all that said, would anyone like to thank our Heavenly Family?
I will. Heavenly Family, that was really good. That's exactly what Trent's last little speech there is exactly what has been messing up all of us, especially those that are, especially the religious world, especially our Adventist friends, Christians. And I just thank you for just being so patient with us and just helping us to just get rid of those mental blocks. And I do despise them too, but I just thank you for your truth, and I thank you for your guidance and your patience. In the name of the branch and sheet, amen.
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 All right. Love you all lots. Have a good night, and see you on tomorrow night's meeting.
Good night.